Hey folks, today we're going to talk about the myth of the Trojan War. Most people know of the Trojan War or have heard of the Trojan Horse or something, but the Trojan War is important to us because it is the prequel to the Odyssey. The main character of the Odyssey, a guy named Odysseus, is on his way home from the Trojan War, just trying to make it back to his wife and kids. And that's sort of his quest throughout the entire story. So we're finally getting to the myths that really, really matter to what it is that we're going to be doing in class. This is one you definitely want to pay attention to, maybe take a few notes on so that you know what's going on as time goes forward. So, the myth of the Trojan War. As I said when we did Oedipus, there were two major myth cycles that got written down when Greece transitioned from a oral tradition country, where they told everything by word of mouth, to a written tradition country. And one of them was, Oedipus, which was written down in a series of plays. And the other was the story of Troy and the Iliad and the Odyssey, which was written down as heroic epic by this guy named Homer. Homer is a blind poet and storyteller from ancient Greece, who is credited with the writing of these two famous books. The Iliad, that's essentially the story I'm going to be telling today, though the Trojan War is much bigger than the Iliad. The Iliad is one of the final episodes in the story of the Trojan War. So we tend to think about the Iliad as being the book that tells the story of the Trojan War, but it really doesn't. It doesn't tell how it started. It doesn't tell the bit about the Trojan Horse and how it ended. Those things don't show up in that book at all. And then the Odyssey, which is the one we're going to read, which is about Odysseus' return trip. So let's start with ancient Greece. So if you look at the map of ancient Greece, you can see Troy is over here on what we call Asia Minor. It's sort of near present day Istanbul, up that sort of area, as opposed to Greece. But the whole coast of Asia Minor was settled by Greek people. It had Greek culture, and Troy was probably the biggest and most important city in it at the time. Over here in Greece, you can see all the classic cities that we've come to know. Athens, Sparta, Thebes, the Oracle at Delphi, Corinth, Mycenae. Mycenae is where the king of Greece was living at the time. Ithaca is actually a little island over here, and that's where Odysseus is from. So the story of the Trojan War, though, actually doesn't start in any of these very famous places. It starts in a little island here south of Athens. You can see it. Being right there. That island is called the island of Aegina. And the king of the island of Aegina was this guy named Peleus. Peleus was actually one of the Argonauts from the story Jason and the Argonauts. And he fell in love with a river nymph named Thetis. And the two of them decided that they were going to get married. Now, Peleus is immortal, and Thetis, being a river nymph, is immortal. So it's sort of a marriage that's going to create a demigod, and that demigod is going to be important. But what is important before we even get into that story of the demigod is that Peleus and Thetis getting married was a big event. They decided to have a big wedding, and Peleus invited all his friends, which of course are all the Argonauts from Jason and the Argonauts, who are the kings of all their respective Greek countries. And so they're all coming. So you have the royalty of Greece coming, and sort of a reunion of Jason and the Argonauts and the living Argonauts coming. And then Thetis invites all of her friends, who are all gods and goddesses. So you have the pantheon of all the Greek gods coming. So you have this giant wedding that's going to involve all the Greek gods and all the kings and heroes of Greece simultaneously. Now, I'm going to have a sidetrack for a second, because Peleus and Thetis have a son, and the son is very important to the story of the Trojan War. His name is Achilles, and he's not born yet, because we're talking about the wedding. But you need to know the basic story of Achilles, and most people do. So the story of Achilles goes like this. Achilles was born, and like Oedipus, there was a prophecy read about him. And the prophecy declared that he had two fates. One fate was that if he went off to war, he would be the greatest warrior in the history of time, and people would remember him forever, but that he would die young. The other was that if he never went off to war, he would live to be a very old man and live a profitable and fulfilling life as a good king on his island, but that the choice was going to be up to him. Well, his mom didn't like that thought. She was very upset at the thought that her son would die, and so she actually took her son Achilles as a baby down to the river Styx, and she dipped him in. And what the river Styx did was it made him impervious to injury. So he had been essentially coated with this magical ability not to be injured in any way. The problem was that she held him by the heel when she dipped him. I don't know why she didn't double dip him or put him in like a McDonald's fries basket and dip him in there. I don't know. But he ended up having one weak spot, which was his Achilles heel. And now we use an Achilles heel as an idiom for somebody's one weak spot. And also there's a tendon on the back of your heel called the Achilles, and we'll figure out as we tell the story of the Trojan War why that's the case. But he's not born yet. We're having a marriage. There's a big old wedding, a Greek wedding. I don't know, a big fat Greek wedding. And it's an Argonaut reunion, and the gods and men all come. It turns out that Thetis invites all of the gods and goddesses except one. The goddess she doesn't invite on purpose. Her name is Eris, and she is the goddess of discord. She causes problems wherever she goes, and why would you want to invite the goddess of discord to a wedding which is supposed to be a happy event? Well, of course, Eris finds out that this wedding is going on and that she hasn't been invited, and she's pissed. And so she decides she's going to wedding crash. Why not? She's a goddess of discord. It's what she does. Not only is she going to wedding crash, but she's going to cause, you guessed it, discord. And so she gets a golden apple from the magical tree of golden apples, and then she carves into it the words, "For the most beautiful." So she goes to the wedding, she crashes, she sneaks in, and she looks for the best place to lay her trap. She finds the three goddesses, Athena, goddess of wisdom, Hera, Zeus's wife, sort of associated with leadership and kingship and rulership, and Aphrodite, the goddess of love, all hanging out together. And so she takes her golden apple and she rolls it into the party, and it rolls over and lands at their feet. And of course, Hera picks it up and takes a look at it, and she's like, "Oh, to the most beautiful. It must be for me." And Aphrodite's like, "Hold up. I'm the goddess of love, yo." And Athena's like, "Wait, I'm young and attractive too." And so they start fighting about who is the most attractive. It doesn't entirely ruin the wedding, but it makes things Sorry about that. It makes things complicated, clearly. Now, this feud between the three of them does not end when the wedding ends. They carry it with them, and eventually they carry it to Zeus. They're looking for somebody to arbitrate who is the most beautiful. They bring this apple to him. They say, "Hey, look, this apple says to the most beautiful, and it's clearly meant for one of us. You're the king of the gods. You have to choose." And Zeus is like, "Oh, Hades, no, I am not doing this." First off, one of them's his wife, and one of them's his daughter, and one of them's the goddess of love. And whoever he chooses, he's smart enough to realize that he's going to have two who are pissed at him and one who's not. And so how can he make a choice? He says, "I'm not going to do it." But he's smart enough to come up with a solution. He says, "I'll make a suggestion. Why don't you go down to Earth? There's this guy living in Troy, the city of Troy." Remember, Troy is that one over on the coast up here, very prosperous. There's a guy living in Troy. His name is Paris, and he is the most attractive human being, male human being on the planet. What better judge of beauty than the most attractive man? He's as attractive as Narcissus once was. So go see him and ask him to judge. Maybe he'll judge your beauty contest. And so they're satisfied, and they decide to have Paris, the Prince of Troy, judge their beauty contest. And so they go down and they have a beauty contest. They show up to Paris, and they're like, "Hey, we've got this apple. We're trying to decide who is the most beautiful of all the goddesses. Will you decide?" And he thinks about it, and he's like, "Yeah, okay, I'll do that." And so they have I guess, the world's first beauty pageant where, they show him everything and, model and talk to him. And he has real trouble deciding. I mean, they're all goddesses. They're all stunningly gorgeous. And so at the end of the day, he's like, I can't decide. Can I sleep on it? I'll tell you in the morning. And they're like, "Okay, sure, you can sleep on it and tell us in the morning." And so what ends up happening that night is actually pretty funny. Paris goes to bed and tosses and turns for a little bit. Ultimately, he does go to sleep. But all of a sudden, in the middle of the night, he is awakened. Poof. Hera has appeared next to his bed. And Hera says, "Hey, Paris, I just want you to know that if you choose me tomorrow, I'm Zeus's wife. I'm a goddess of kingship and rulers. I can make you a powerful man. You can conquer all of your neighbors. You can be the most powerful kingdom in Greece and the king of it all. Just say the word. I'll do it for you. And then whoosh, she disappears. And Paris is like, huh. And he goes back to sleep. And then shortly thereafter, whoosh, Athena appears next to his bed. And she leans down. She's like, hey, Paris, I'm the goddess of wisdom. If you say that I'm the most beautiful tomorrow, I can make you the most intelligent man in the world. You can know the answers to everything. You can invent things. You can write things. You can end up being remembered for all of eternity as one of the wisest human beings the world has ever known. Think about it. Just choose me. And then she disappears. And then, of course, you guessed it, a few minutes later, in a giant heart-shaped cloud or whatever of pink smoke, Aphrodite shows up. And she's like, hey, Paris, I just want you to know that if you choose me tomorrow, I'll do a favor for you. I'll let you sleep with the most attractive woman in the world, and I'll make her fall in love with you. Just, pick me tomorrow. And then she disappears. And, Paris has to decide. Now, the question, of course, is which would he decide? Would he choose power or wisdom or love? If love's the right word. Desire? Now, what's a guy going to decide? This is the question. Now, of course, you've already known that the next day when Paris went to decide, he gave the golden apple to Aphrodite, because he wanted to sleep with the most attractive girl in the world. Now, this would have been fine, except that the most attractive woman in the world was this woman named Helen. Helen of Sparta. You may have heard of Sparta. It is the center of sort of the warrior culture and the greatest warriors in Greece. Yeah, this Sparta right here. I don't know if you've seen the movie 300. Now, the other problem is that Helen wasn't just some woman from Sparta. She was married to this dude, Menelaus, who happened to be the king of Sparta. So, Helen is married to Menelaus. He's the king of Sparta, and she's been promised to Paris. Well, Paris gets on a ship, and he goes and visits Sparta. Helen takes one look at him, falls head over heels madly in love with him. He, of course, looks at her, and she's the most beautiful woman in the world, and he falls madly in love with her. The two of them get on a boat and run away to Troy. Now, she has been referred to, Helen, as the face that launched 1,000 ships, because this becomes the reason for the Trojan War. It turns out that Menelaus here, king of Sparta, has a brother. And his brother is named Agamemnon, and he's the king of Mycenae, and the king of all the Greeks, sort of the ruler of them all. So not only did Paris cross Menelaus, king of Sparta, but he crossed Agamemnon, king of all Greece. Fun fact, Agamemnon and Menelaus are married to twin sisters, Clytemnestra and Helen was the other one. And these twin sisters also had two brothers, Castor and Pollux, who were members of the crew of the Argo. So, there's a lot of connections between these stories. But yes, you can see Mycenae here and Sparta here on the map, and here's Troy. Well, Agamemnon starts gathering famous heroes and warriors and groups to join in the attack on Troy. And not surprisingly, a number of these are the sons of the old Argonauts who went on the journey in the Argo. So we end up with a lot of great heroes coming together for this battle. For the Greeks, of course, we got Agamemnon. We already met him, king of the Greeks. His brother Menelaus, greatest king of Sparta. Then we have this old warrior who was an original Argonaut. He was the youngest man on the crew of the Argo. His name is Nestor. Now he's an old man, but he goes off and joins the battle. There's a man named Ajax from present-day Athens. And he is enormous. He is like 7 feet tall and is built like Arnold Schwarzenegger, the scariest, tallest of all the Greeks. He also has this giant towering shield that no other man can lift that he uses to protect his brother, who is an archer. There's a guy, Diomedes. Oh, I love Diomedes. He's actually my favorite person in the book as a Greek hero. He is not, you know, born of any god or anything like that. His dad was an Argonaut on the Argo, but Diomedes is this great warrior who is maybe third or fourth or fifth strongest of the Greeks, but he never quits and he never gives up. There's actually this great scene in the story of the Trojan War, if you read the Iliad, where the fighting is the thickest. And one of the things that the gods do is they like give their favor to heroes, and it's almost like they ride them sort of into battle and fight. And Diomedes is out in the middle of the battlefield fighting, and he realizes all of a sudden that the guy he's fighting is not a man. It's actually Ares, the god of war, that he's fighting against. Ares has taken human shape and he's fighting on the Trojan side. And Diomedes realizes he's fighting Ares. And Ares sort of reveals himself to him and tells him to run away, and Diomedes refuses. And so he fights with the god of war, ultimately stabbing him and injuring him, and Ares has to flee. Of course, if you put a god to shame, that's an example of hubris, and you're later destined to die, which is what happens to Diomedes, and I feel bad for him. But it was a pretty cool moment. Then there's, of course, Odysseus. Odysseus's father, Peleus, was an Argonaut. Different Peleus. No, Laertes. Laertes is his father. Ignore that. Peleus is the father of Achilles. So Odysseus's father, Laertes, was an Argonaut, but Odysseus is incredibly smart. He's known for his intelligence and his battle strategies. That's the primary thing that he brings to the table. Then, of course, you've got Achilles. Achilles' best friend, Patroclus, is also one of the soldiers, a very good soldier by all accounts. There may be more than just friendship going on between the two of them. It's heavily implied in the story, but you never know for sure. And then on the other side, you have the Trojans. You start out with the king of Troy, a guy named Priam. He's too old to really fight. He has a number of sons, like a lot of sons. But the firstborn son is a guy named Hector, who is arguably the second greatest warrior after Achilles out there on the field. He has a wife and kids, and he really is sort of like the good guy, the guy you root for in the Trojan War, because this is not his fault. It's his brother Paris who started the whole thing by bringing Helen back. And he's the one who has to bear the brunt of this and go off and fight in the war. But of course, there's Paris. Paris is a coward. He does not like fighting hand to hand. He's kind of weak. He's very attractive, but he's kind of weak, and he likes to fight with a bow and arrow, sometimes poisoning his arrows to kill his enemies. And then the third, I guess, important guy on the side of the Trojans is this guy named Aeneas, who is actually a son of Aphrodite. It puts Aphrodite in a pretty difficult spot. I mean, she got selected, so she's kind of happy with the Trojans and their choice, but it brings war to the city, and one of her own sons is, you know, a member of the Trojan nobility, and so she stands to maybe lose a son in this battle. But yeah, so he's there. The problem is that it's almost impossible to breach Troy. The war actually lasts 10 years. So people are young when they leave, like Odysseus. When he leaves for Troy, you know, he's maybe 20. By the time the Trojan War ends, he's 30. 10 years have passed. So it's a long haul, and it turns out that it gets so bad that the Greeks almost lose. They almost flee. They can't seem to breach those Trojan walls. And things get really bad when a plague hits the Greek army and people are dying left and right. And so Agamemnon, the king of the Greeks, he sends for a seer, for a sort of a prophet, to figure out why there is a plague. And the answer is that recently the Greek army had raided a temple, I think a temple of Apollo, and they had captured 2 priestesses who were sisters, and Agamemnon had taken one of them as his slave, and Achilles had taken another one as his slave. And Apollo was angry that they had stolen them and asked that they give one of them back, particularly the one that is Agamemnon's slave. And so Agamemnon has to give up his slave girl, and he ends up, this is where the book, the Iliad, starts. He is so upset that he's sort of losing face and giving up his slave girl that he decides he's going to steal Achilles' slave girl, and thereby save his pride. And so he does. He steals Achilles' slave girl, and Achilles is like, well, you stole my slave girl. I'm not going to fight for you anymore. And so he goes and sulks by his ships. And so because Achilles isn't out there to help fight against Hector, Hector and the Trojans start defeating the Greeks in battle after battle after battle. And so it looks like the Trojans are ultimately going to win the Trojan War. The actual story of the Iliad is pretty interesting. Achilles rages by his ships and does not help them, and everything the Greeks do basically fails, and the Trojans get so far that they're actually at the Greek ships and are able to set some of them on fire, and a number of Greek warriors and famous fighters die. It looks really bad. In fact, it looks like the Greeks are going to lose, and Achilles still refuses to go join the fight no matter who begs him. So ultimately, his best friend slash maybe lover, Patroclus, takes Achilles' armor and puts it on and goes off to battle pretending to be Achilles. And the Greeks turn the tide, and the Trojans get forced back. But Hector, greatest warrior of the Greeks, knows that the only way that he can turn the tide back to his side is to defeat Achilles in personal combat. He knows it's almost impossible. He knows Achilles is the greatest warrior of his time, but Hector determines that he's going to fight Achilles anyway, and so he decides to fight Achilles. But of course, he's not fighting Achilles. He thinks he's fighting Achilles, but he's really fighting Patroclus, and he kills Achilles' best friend Patroclus, and this crushes Achilles' spirit. Achilles knows that he should have been fighting, that he let his friend go, and his friend is dead because he was sulking beside his ships. And so Achilles decides that he has to go back and join the fight, but he doesn't have any armor. So he goes and he cries to the ocean because his mom's a nymph, and his mom comes out of the ocean and is like, "What's wrong, baby boy?" And like it's a mama's boy moment. Achilles is like, "I lost my best friend and my slave girl, and I don't have any armor," and so Thetis is like, "Okay, I'll get you some armor." She goes to Hephaestus and has some special magic armor made and brings it back, and Achilles puts on the magic armor and he goes off to war. And of course, he encounters Hector, and they have an epic battle, and Achilles kills Hector. And so the Trojans lose their greatest warrior, but it's not over, because shortly thereafter, Paris, with his poisoned arrows, shoots an arrow at Achilles, hoping to kill him. It's not a very good shot. It only nicks his heel. Oh, right. The story of Achilles and the Achilles heel. It does. It nicks his heel, and it's poisoned, and Achilles dies from the poison. And sort of both sides have lost their great war leaders, and it looks like it's back to stalemate again. But of course, the Trojan War, as we all know, ends with the famous Trojan Horse. It looks like the Greeks are not going to be successful. They're actually having a meeting to determine whether or not to continue the siege or to leave and give up the assault of Troy. When Athena gives inspiration to Odysseus, she tells Odysseus that what they should do, they have more ships than they have men now because they've lost so many men in this fight, is that they should take the ships that they don't need, take them apart, and build a giant horse. Troy was famous for horses. It was one of the things they sold, horses. Build a giant horse out of it. A hollow horse in which they could hide soldiers. And they'd hide their best soldiers, all those ones I showed you, Ajax and Odysseus and all the famous ones that were still alive. They'd hide them inside, and then they would leave. And it would look to the Trojans like they gave up and they left this peace offering of this horse behind. And the Trojans would come out and they'd take the horse and they'd bring it into their city, and probably they'd all get drunk and have a celebration because the war was over. And that night when they were all drunk, the Greek heroes would open the belly of the horse, come out, and then go fight for the gatehouse and open the doors of the city. once they opened the doors of the city, their friends who had sailed only so far as they were over the horizon and then come back under cover of darkness, all the Greek warriors would be able to come in and sack the city and burn it down. And so this seemed like a good idea to the Greeks, and they decided to adopt it. And so they built the Trojan horse, and a bunch of Greek warriors hid inside, and then they sailed away. And then the Trojans came out and saw the horse, and they tried to decide what to do with it. And some of the Trojans were like, I don't trust the Greeks. Beware Greeks bearing gifts. Let's burn it. And others were like, well, like maybe we just leave it out here. And then, of course, Athena shows up amongst them in disguise and is like, I think we should bring it into the city. And of course, they all believe that, and they decide to bring it into the city. They have a celebration. They all get drunk. Just as the plan said it was going to be carried out, it's carried out. The Greeks come out of the horse. They fight over to the gate. They storm it. They open it. The Greek army comes in. The Trojans are completely unprepared. They burn and sack the city and kill everyone, and that's sort of how the Trojan War ends. But of course, when the Trojan War is over, everybody's got to go home with their spoils of war, and things actually get sort of complicated. Let me go back through some of the Greek heroes. I'm going to roll up here. Agamemnon. Agamemnon tries to go home to Mycenae, and it turns out that when he gets there, his wife, Clytemnestra, has been having an affair with a guy, I can't remember his name. No, I can't remember it, not off the top of my head. Maybe. She's having an affair with this guy, I think Aegisthus, and they invite Agamemnon into dinner and then murder him. They wrap him up in a rug and stab him to death. And so Agamemnon gets killed on his return, so his trip to Troy was not great for him. Menelaus, it takes him 5 years to get home. He ends up sort of marooned in Egypt, and he has to capture and wrestle the old man of the sea, Proteus, before he's able to return home. But he and Helen return home and then live a happy life. Nestor has the easiest time getting home. He makes the correct sacrifices to the gods. The gods remember him from his time with the Argonauts, and he returns to Pylos and leads a good life. Ajax, oh God. Ajax actually, his is the most tragic story. After Achilles dies, and Hector is dead, there is a funeral games for Achilles, and the prize of the funeral games is Achilles' armor that was made by the gods. And so it turns out that the two people who are in the contest for the funeral games are Odysseus and Ajax. They're the two that have sort of shown themselves to be the greatest. Now, Ajax is more physically strong and bigger and able to win a lot of physical contests, but anything that involves strategy and thinking, Odysseus is much better at. And so Odysseus actually wins the games and wins the suit of armor of Achilles, and this makes Ajax so angry that he sort of loses his mind in rage. He wades off into the cattle of the Greek army and just murders them all, kind of like, your Minecraft cowherd style, and just murders all these cows. And then he's so embarrassed by what he's done in his fit of rage that he let rage take over him so much that he commits suicide. And so he died by his own hand, which is very tragic. Diomedes, I told you his story. He didn't make it through the battle. He was killed in war. And Odysseus is the subject of the Odyssey. He tries to get home, but it's going to take him 10 years to get home. If we roll down and we look at the map, you can see all the various destinations. Odysseus has to go from Troy to Ithaca over here. And it's going to take him a long, long while to get home, partially because he didn't make adequate sacrifices to Poseidon, partially because some of his actions on the way home and his own pride and hubris at being the guy who invented the Trojan horse and thinking he's all that. And so we'll read his story in the Odyssey. I don't want to give away too much, but it's all going to focus on him and his return. But all of them pretty much have a hard time. In fact, one last story. Remember this guy Aeneas? There's actually a story written about him by this Roman guy named Virgil. It's called the Aeneid, and it's another heroic epic. So if you like the Odyssey and you want to read something similar, I highly recommend the Aeneid. This guy Aeneas actually escapes Troy with a band of loyal followers, and they sail all around the Mediterranean, ultimately founding a city called Rome, and it connects Rome and Troy. in this interesting way. So anyway, here's where Ithaca is. You can see it on the map, and you can go up and you can see it there. So that just sort of helps you with your connection to the Odyssey. But that's the story of the Trojan War. You know, it's powerful stuff and really famous stuff. And if you liked it, I highly recommend reading the Iliad. It's a great book. It's almost entirely full of battles and combats, and I think I read it freshman year in high school. I didn't have to; it wasn't assigned or anything. I think after the Odyssey unit, I got really into it, and I decided I was going to read it. And it was a little bit of a slog. It was definitely above my reading level, but I enjoyed it all the same. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this lecture. Anybody who has any questions, let me know. I'm happy to answer them. Thanks.